Hello and welcome to MetaWatch, Games Workshop's regular look at all things matched play, and this time we're off to the Mortal Realms with a new battle scroll for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So who better to talk about it than Matt from the studio? Matt, how you doing? You all right?
Yeah, doing great.
Really good to have you here, and now it's time for a new battle scroll. Why now?
So we're partway into the new season, and we tend to release the battle scrolls kind of every few months, quarterly. And so this is really our first opportunity going into the new season to take a look at some of the new data, see how armies are performing, which armies are over underperforming, and then make a few adjustments just to kind of try to smooth things out.
There's a few little tweaks here or there, not the sort of tweaks we'd see at the release of a new General's Handbook, but this is a few little minor adjustments.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
We're starting off with a couple of changes to the universal spells from Andor, and a change to Rupture, which you've noted was perhaps a bit strong with the old Incarnate of Ghur before.
Well, so the Rupture as a spell was really interesting because its inclusion was lower than we'd like. So obviously both Merciless Blizzard and Hoarfrost are kind of taking quite a bit and seeing a lot of play. Rupture was seeing less play, but also was mainly used for some quite kind of techie combos that potentially opponents wouldn't be anticipating or wouldn't necessarily understand. So one of the main ways that it was being used in competitive play was to rupture your own Incarnate, to make it go wild and feed it one of your own spells so that you can kind of get a level 3 Incarnate right off the bat. And so, that, because that's a little bit of a gotcha, we've reworked the spell to kind of go back to the original intent. And so that's focused in on giving more counterplay to the dramatically increased number of endless spells roaming around the battlefield, as well as Incarnates. So, what this lets you do is immediately make an enemy Incarnate, not your own, go wild, but also lose a power level. It's a really great way to take them down a notch. Or you can use it to immediately dispel an enemy predatory endless spell. And when you do so, it actually kind of does damage back up the chain to the caster that summoned it. So it just gives you another tool in your tool bag to kind of counter a lot of these endless spells and Incarnates that are roaming around.
It's a good idea because there's a lot of them. You've also got a change here to Merciless Blizzard, which is the spell designed to just cause massive mortal wounds to a target. Why you've made the change you've made?
So Merciless Blizzard, it's quite a minor change. The change is just that you can't cast it after moving in that phase or being set up in that phase. Now, because it's cast in the hero phase, for the vast majority of units, this isn't a problem because you move in the movement phase. After, most teleports happen in the movement phase or abilities. But what it was, where the problems came was that there was quite uneven access to hero phase moves or hero phase teleports. So some units that can use a heroic action to teleport, like vampires. And so this kind of created haves and have-nots a little bit, where there was a few units that could kind of immediately teleport deep into enemy territory, cast Blizzard, sometimes even get back out. And so this is really just putting a bit of a safety on those combos, just to make sure that it's a very powerful and scary tool, but that everyone kind of has even access to how to interact with it, or magical armies.
I guess that's how you wanted it, how you intended the rule to be when you first wrote it, was a sort of dangerous spell if you get close enough, not meant to be the ultimate assassin tool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair play. You've got another few changes here as well, a few endless spells and battle plan changes too.
Yeah, a couple minor ones, really just some quality of life things, and again, just trying to correct with original intent. So minor changes to spell portal, just a wording cleanup to stop spells moving after teleporting through it. Malevolent Maelstrom, capping it off so that it really only detonates when it fully charges up. And then Feedback Overload, so on no reward without risk. Just cleaning up the language so that it's clear which units are affected and not.
It's a nice little quality of life change.
Yeah, little minor tweaks just to make sure that everything's going smoothly.
Excellent. Now, let's move on to the bit that loads of people are itching to hear about. We're going to talk about individual factions, and we'll start off with those that were, last time we spoke, overperforming on the graph that you showed us. Soulblight Gravelords, they've been hit quite a bit with this one.
Yeah, they have. So Soulblight have continued to do really, really well. Still up at a 62-ish% win rate. Definitely the top performing faction, although OCR Bone Reapers, which we'll talk about in a second, are close behind. And what's really interesting about Soulblight when you go into the data is the internal balance is actually fairly good. So, when we look at the balance of a faction, we try to dig down and say, okay, well, what's causing the problems here? Is it one unit that's really strong? Is it one subfaction that's really strong? So, in the case of Lumineth Realm Lords, Helon was overperforming, but the rest of it wasn't. With Soulblight Gravelords, we see quite even performance across a number of subfactions. So we've seen Legion of Night doing really well, Legion of Blood doing really well, Vyrkos doing really well. Even the less popular subfactions, army types, still perform quite well when they're run. And same with units. So, you've got a lot of the units where, zombies, for instance, Deadwalker zombies have been doing really well, but so have skeletons, so have direwolves, so have Graveguard. You've got lots of choices, and there's a lot of depth. And so it makes it tricky to kind of apply a laser-focused tweak. So because of that, the approach that we've taken is to, put relatively low, there's a lot of them are 10 points, some a bit more, increases across a wider range of units. So because you can build your army many ways competitively, and people do, there's a bit of a lift on a number of units so that no matter what, no matter which of the kind of popular competitive builds you're leaning into, you're probably going to have to drop something from your list.
I was going to say, chances are you'll have one less unit than you might otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah, fair enough. They're still going to be pretty good, though. You've also made a change to the Spirit Gale.
Yeah, so Spirit Gale, so that's both a balance fix, but also a quality of life fix. So Spirit Gale is a spell that deals, inflicts one mortal wound across like every enemy unit, which against some armies, if you're playing against Mega Gargants or something, is not going to do an awful lot. But against certain armies, particularly against a lot of the armies that aren't performing very well right now, and maybe lean into having quite a large number of small units. So Skaven or Nighthaunt, or there's a number of armies, Stormcast Eternals, Slaves to Darkness, that often run quite a large number of units. And they really take a big impact from this, particularly when if you get the higher casting roll, then you would inflict 2 mortal wounds on everything. And so that adds up really quickly. And sometimes, this one spell with casting value of 7, which you can quite easily get bonuses to cast, would be doing 10, 15, 20 mortal wounds a turn, which is just kind of outside of the kind of balance with other spells at a similar level. And so I think it needed to just be brought in line with other spells, and so that was the one kind of specific change. There's also the quality of life side, which is when you're doing 1 mortal wound to everything, it just makes a lot of individual wounds to track across all units, so it just helps clean that up a little bit. So we've just restricted that down to pick 3 units to affect. To do 1 mortal wound. If you get the higher roll, you get to pick 6 units, but it's still just the 1.
A great spell for a 7 to cast, and with Primal Magic dice as well. It's not that difficult to get off.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also made a change to a force close to my heart, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, and especially spells that bring back the Immortis Guard and the Necropolis Stalkers.
Yeah, so it's the ability. So there's Catacross, Arcan, and the Bone Shaper all have same ability to kind of bring back models. And generally the way that worked is you could bring back, Mortek Guard or some of the smaller units automatically. But for the bigger units, so, Immortis Guard and Necropolis Stalkers, you'd roll a dice, and on a 3-up, you could bring one back. And this could be a bit of a feels bad for players because they're very, very difficult to kill. They're 5 wounds each. They can quite easily get to a 2-up save. They can have a 5-up ward. And then when you finally manage to kill 1 or 2 or 3, having them come back can be pretty disheartening. And, it's not just one, because often, what happens is a lot of people run a Bone Shaper and Catacross and Arcan. And so, you'd bring one back and then pass another 3-up roll. And, eventually you could have 3 coming back in a turn. 15 wounds that are really, really hard to chew through. So a bit disheartening. So the change that we've made there is the ability is still there. You can still bring a model back on a 3, but effectively they come back with only 1 wound. So if you were stopping there, it means you still have the offensive output. You can still get into combat. You can still use that unit on something like Necropolis Stalkers. Can be quite good. But, your opponent doesn't have to chew all the way through that unit again. And if you want to combo it with your other healing, you can do that too. You can bring the guy back, heal 3 wounds, bring him back up to full health. It just means that you can't get 1, 2, 3 back in a row.
And an Immortus Guard on 1 wound is the perfect target for a Spirit Gale, of course. It's interesting as well because that's the only change you made to Ossiarch Bone Reapers this time round, and it's focusing on that one particular unit type. Did you see that was the unit that was making a real difference, do you think?
Yeah, so it's not the only change. We've made some points adjustments. It's the only rules change. So Immortus Guard definitely had very, very high inclusion, very high win rate when included, and we're really forming the core of a lot of Ossiarch Bone Reapers forces, alongside, the Bone Shaper pretty much auto-include in every list. And then either Catacross or Arcan, or both, forms that. And so, the other thing that we're seeing with Ossiarch is, it's not that big of a range, and the internal balance isn't quite where we wanted it to be because, some of these units are so strong that people really are building into that. And a lot of the lists look very similar. So based on that, we've made a few points adjustments, and that, has a couple of increases. So Cavalos Death Riders, which we're already seeing people start to move from Immortus Guard. There's always a blend of Immortus Guard and Death Riders, but we're starting to see more and more Death Riders. So it's only a 10-point increase. But again, it's just to prevent kind of a wholesale swing away. And Catacross, who is an incredibly efficient War Scroll, can kind of do just a ton for you on the table, has seen a more significant increase with 40 points. Now, relative to the cost of the unit, it's still only kind of a 10% increase. But then alongside, and kind of to offset that, we've dropped the points on some of the units that aren't seeing enough play. So particularly the Gothvizar Harvester, Mortek Guard, and the Mortek Crawler as well. So all of those get 20-point drops, and I'm really excited to see if that moves the needle and starts to get a bit better internal balance.
It'd be nice to see more armies of infantry on the table
for
Ossiarchs. You've also made some changes to the Head Knights of Slaanesh as well, with a few points adjustments there too.
Yeah, so just points for Head Knights. Again, relatively minor. Lots of plus 10 point or minus 10 points. Head Knights are a trickier one to manage. They have been doing quite well. They've been up at that kind of 57% win rate. Although they have not been winning a lot of events. So they tend to perform quite well at events. They have certainly won a handful and go 5-0 now and then. But it's one of those armies that kind of tends to go 3-2 pretty decently. So again, looking at internal balance there as well as external, and just being a bit cautious with Slaanesh with the points changes. So Blitzbarb Archers are the most included. That has really become the kind of core block in I think I have a 90% inclusion, so for Head Knights of Slaanesh, they're pretty much in every list. So they're only going up 10 points. They have been doing very, very well as kind of the core gun line. But I think, what that limits is just really leaning into spamming them. And then, a few other adjustments for both units of Seekers, Blitzbarb Seekers and Slickblade Seekers, Contorted Epitome and the Mask, all really popular. And then we've got drops on Fiends, Murmurdesh Painbringers, and Slangors. So just, some cautious changes for Slaanesh, but hopefully just take the edge off a little bit.
That's because I feel like moving those little levers, just tiny little tweaks here and there to try and get those changes.
Yeah.
And hopefully to get what you want. Right, let's move on to the underperforming lists because we had a few of those last time we spoke. And you've actually included some new battle tactics for 3 factions, which is really cool. Last time we spoke about the fact that perhaps the universal battle tactics in the books might be a bit harder to do now.
Yeah, so the universal tactics, they're not necessarily more difficult. It depends on the faction. I would say overall they probably are, but mainly there was a very intentional shift where the universal tactics available in this new GHB tend to require you to dedicate some resources to things that you weren't necessarily going to do anyways, rather than in the past we've had tactics where it's, kill a unit on objective, and that's something you were doing anyways and you could lean in. So you could kind of do the tactic just alongside whatever you were going to do anyways and just pick it and score it. So, the new ones require a bit more thought, and that puts more pressure on the battle tome tactics. And, because there's a lot of battle tomes, they each have a lot of tactics. The level of difficulty across battle tome tactics is uneven, and it's been uneven over battle tomes that maybe came out really early in the cycle of Age of Sigmar versus later. So we did an experiment last Battle Scroll with Kruleboyz and Ironjaws, and by association Big Waaagh. We can use both. And we found that actually was quite effective at moving the needle. And we saw, Big Waaagh basically go to, I think it's at an exact 50% win rate right now, which is exactly where we want it to be. And so that was a really effective change at moving that. So, we looked at all the battle tomes and the tactics that they have, and we felt that there was 3 all early 3rd edition battle tomes that kind of really weren't on par in terms of access to battle tactics. So the 3 that we focused on were Stormcast Eternals, Maggotkin of Nurgle, and Skaven. So for instance, with Skaven, a lot of the tactics in their book really required a specific build, required you to have all Eshin or all Pestilence. And so we wanted to give them something that could just be used across the army. So yeah, that's kind of why, and really curious to see how those perform once they're out.
I really like the Skaven one. They had 2 units retreat, a unit and a hero retreat. It seems as well that they're if you set them up, they're relatively simple to perform, but they might change your plan a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of times with tactics, a little bit like I talked about with the universals, is that it's not always extremely difficult to pull them off, but sometimes it requires you to commit resources in a way that might be tricky for later, right? So it's relatively easy to retreat with 2 units that are in combat, but maybe you needed them to be in combat to fight something, and what about next turn? And are you retreating off an objective that you wanted to capture, etc. And so I think we've tried to strike the right balance with these, that they will they will help these factions out and give them an opportunity to kind of level the playing field in terms of scoring tactics, but still have interesting choices and potential counterplay for the opponents.
Because even an extra 2 victory points scored in a game should see their victory count increase quite high.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at the bigger picture, while we have over and underperforming factions, it's still quite a tight field. And so, a lot of these factions that are on the lower end are not there by much. They're 44, 45% win rate. So they're kind of just outside of that target window. So, we need to be a bit cautious when we're making these changes.
And of course, if you hit changes at the top as well, they'll be winning less, which means the ones at the bottom win more.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just depending on shifts in the meta, there's sometimes we see new builds or ideas get unlocked, and factions which previously weren't performing all of a sudden, go on a bit of a rampage. So we saw that with Flesh Eater Courts, and, there's a number. And so you kind of never know when someone's going to find a really great
magic build,
and then that can kind of quickly proliferate throughout the community. So yeah, always just watching.
So apart from those new battle tactics, what else have we done for the underperforming factions?
So we've made a few other minor changes. They're mostly what I would classify as quality of life changes, although I think they'll also have a balance impact. And this is across a number of factions. So we just talked about Skaven getting a new battle tactic. We've also made a very small tweak to the Grey Seer on Screaming Bell and the Plague Priest on Plague Furnace. Both of these beautiful kits, nice centerpieces, but neither seeing the level of play that we'd like. And it's a very simple one line change, which is to remove the pushed into battle rule. So they had this very kind of thematic and very fun rule where in order to move, you have to surround the unit with clan rats and push it along the battlefield. But it means that it's actually it can be a real liability where when that unit of clan rats dies, you have your big centerpiece powerful thing just sitting there, not able to do anything. And so it didn't quite put them on equal footing with that.
I asked you before we shot. I was going to ask you on camera, how do you think it moves now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a Grey Seer on it. But the short answer is that it moves in the same way as a Cauldron of Blood.
It's just magic.
We'll just leave it there.
It's fine. Yeah. Also, a few points changes here as well. A few points drops for a few factions too, with Idoneth, Skaven, Stormcast, Slaves, Darkness, Nighthaunt, and Maggot King all getting the benefit of the points drop.
Yeah. So, again, lots of adjustments there, really digging into that per unit data. And in particular, what we tend to look at is when we're looking to adjust external balance, is we're looking at units that are getting run, that are seeing play, and that people are including in their competitive list. So units people are trying to make work, and we're lowering points on those. Because what that means is that you can take your existing list and probably add something to it. And we need to do these things kind of one step at a time. So we'll do that, measure, see what that does for the list before digging into internal balance. So, units that maybe don't have as much inclusion, which we definitely want to correct, but we don't want to kind of pull the rug out from people and say, oh, well, now these units that you aren't using, you need to switch your whole army in order to be able to compete.
So you're focusing more on the units that people kind of are taking quite a lot.
For now, and it'll just be one step at a time. We'll get those units to a good competitive place, and then next time, we can expand out and move on to internal balance. So number of shifts there, I think will be interesting. I think there's some, Nighthaunt, there's some very good units there getting some pretty competitive drops. Slaves to Darkness, same. Varengard we were talking about before. More drops on Chaos Warriors, Chaos Lord, Chaos Chosen, excellent unit. Stormcast Eternals, more drops. So I think, really good stuff there. And that goes alongside, like I said, a couple other rules tweaks. So Idoneth Deepkin, we've made a minor change to Fuethan. So they have the Bloodthirsty Shiver where you can kind of run a bunch of the Alapexes together. That subfaction and rule weren't used that often because it's a little tricky to pull off. You kind of have to get two of them together. One of them gets a buff. We've just simplified that to basically give exploding sixes. So when you roll a 6, you get another hit on their attacks if they're in a Bloodthirsty Shiver. So nice quality of life, but one of the things Idoneth struggles with is a lack of rend, and the Alapexes are one of the sources of rend that they have in their army. So it's kind of giving them a little bit more of a tool there. Lumineth Realm Lords, couple tweaks. Fairly significant tweak to the Alarith unit. So we've taken a couple of shots at this to clarify in erratas, but effectively it's a little bit counterintuitive the way that modifiers and setting characteristics work. So if you have an ability that's, previously the Alarith Enduring as Rock abilities would say, well, if you had Rend 1, it would change it to Rend 0. But because modifiers are added after, that wasn't always intuitive for players. So something that we got a lot of questions about. We've simplified that to just reduce Rend. So that works much more easily because you can add and subtract like any other modifier.
It's better as well.
So it is actually, it's quite a lot better because it means, and I've run my Metrica list a fair bit, and previously you were really good, really tanky up until it came to Ren 3, and then you were hopeless, and you know, it was kind of the key to just flattening your unit. And so now, yeah, you can actually counter that rend because you're going to reduce that Ren 3. So it's definitely going to be a buff for Alarith, which I think is exciting. And then we've also made a change to the Deep Thinker's ability across all of the Sinari units, which effectively allows you to combine Deep Thinkers with Primal Magic Dice. So you get that once per battle spell that you can use Deep Thinkers and then add on. So I think that also, you know, is going to give a lot of good options, a lot of powerful options for them. But it really gives Lumineth, who are, you know, one of the most magical armies, access to the cool new features in this magic-focused GHB. Now, we decided not to make any tweaks to Teclis as of yet. And that's, you know, we're always extra cautious with the big kind of god-tier characters because if they are too powerful or, you know, not powerful enough, that can have a really big impact. And right now what we're seeing is actually we're still seeing quite healthy inclusion and win rates for Teclis. Now we're keeping an eye because Lumineth is dropping from where they were. They were on the edge of overperforming and they've come down. But we're going to see what these changes do to their balance and then go from there.
I guess that's the true across the board, isn't it? It's going to keep an eye on all of the factions, how the changes affect their win rates throughout. No knee-jerk reactions, no quick changes.
Yeah, and you know, it's worth clarifying that we effectively have two different categories of battle scrolls. So, you know, when we tend to alternate between kind of a really major battle scroll where we update points for every unit, and you know, that comes out generally alongside a General's Handbook or, you know, every 6 months. And then in between, you know, we take a snapshot of the data, make more minor adjustments, and then measure and see what's happening. And that's just so that we're not completely, you know, shaking the setup and scrambling all of the data. You know, we really want to iterate to take one step at a time.
It makes a lot of sense. And when you have that information, you'll come back and talk to us about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Brilliant, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time on MetaWatch.